Now, our next guest is another Swift expert. He's got a PhD in Swift's finances, former banker, so he likes the whole financial side, but of course he's an expert much more in many other aspects of Swift's life. And so I've asked him to come in and let you know a little bit about Swift's life that doesn't involve Stella and Vanessa, and his name is Dr Brendan Twomey.
How are you, Gerry?
Good. And before we start, can I thank you for all the help you've been in putting the show together?
No problem.
Why, tell me, would anybody want to do a PhD in Jonathan Swift's finances?
Well, I suppose I could do the Edmund Hillary answer because it's there. But as you've said, I worked in a bank for 40 years. I never lent a penny, by the way, so don't blame me. But I did lots of interesting things. But it gives you a familiarity with numbers and with accounts and so on. And secondly, I'm very interested in history. And I put the two together about 10 years ago, and I've been doing a lot of work on Swift's money ever since.
And where do you find out? Like, is there records?
Yeah.
Where are they?
Well, the main source, believe it or not, is St. Patrick's Hospital. Now, some of you'll have heard the ads on the radio recently for St. Patrick's Hospital. It was founded by Swift's legacy. He left all his money, as he wrote it down himself. He left what little wealth he had to found a house for fools and mad. How much did he leave? He left about £15,000. Now, in 1745. In 1745, a servant or a labourer would have earned between £20 and £30 a year. So £15,000 is, using a technical economic term, a shed load of money. And it built St. Patrick's Hospital.
A mental health hospital?
A mental health hospital.
Why do you think he built a mental health hospital?
Well, firstly, because he wasn't mad, right? Again, there are great Dublin rumours that he was the first patient in his own hospital. Not true. The money is only available after he dies, which is in October 1745. And the first building in the hospital is opened about 3 years later. So he left the money to a set of guardians who were very diligent. They got working really, really quick. They got a royal charter for the hospital. That's the way things were done in those times. And it opened as Ireland's first dedicated mental hospital. And it's still there. And there is a plaque on the door saying Swift's Hospital.
So that was his contribution to mental health.
Well, I think why did he pick mental health, I think, is the question.
Yeah.
And for two reasons, I think. One is he had seen what was happening in London. When he was in London, as Cathy referred, he spent 3 years full-time in London, 1710 to 1713. And he, believe it or not, he was a great traveller, despite Ryanair, or no Ryanair. He visited London 16 times. Many of you have been to London 16 times, right? When it took him 4 days to get there every time. So he was a great traveller that way. Because he was a clergyman, they tended in those days to be ex officio on all sorts of boards. And he was one of the guardians of the Bethlehem Hospital in London, translated into Bedlam. That's where the word Bedlam comes from. Where the mental patients, which was a mental hospital, where the mental patients were on show like a circus. You paid to see the fools and mad. And he just knew that that was wrong. Didn't know quite, maybe, I suspect, why he knew that was wrong. He just said that shouldn't be the way it happens. And in addition, he said, we can do things about this. So he said, I'm going to leave all my money, because he was not married, but he certainly had no children. So he says, I'm going to leave all my money to found Ireland's first mental hospital. And he'd been planning it for over 20 years. The first reference is in the mid-1720s. He dies in 1745. So it is well announced, it's in the papers, everybody knows this is happening.
Again, it's kind of an interesting thing that for his time, I mean, there was no mental health services before that, and to come along and come up with this idea and work on it for all that time. It's an extraordinary departure, and not something we would expect from the great writer, insofar as we know him for Gulliver's Travels, but we don't know him for that kind of thing.
He actually has, he writes voluminous amounts. His works are being edited at the moment, right? And they will be 18 volumes thick when it's finished. And there's very little reference to mental health in them at all. So it was very much a personal decision, but he put a lot of work into it. He had all the bylaws written, he had the charter written, he had the governors set up, etc., etc. So it was ready to go. And when he died in October 1745, the governors inherited his paperwork, which is why I can find out things about his money.
We'll come back to the question I asked in the first place.
Back to where we started.
Okay, so he died a rich man.
Yes.
But I think you've told me he didn't, even though we know him as a writer, he didn't, even though he wrote one of the best-selling books of all time.
Yeah.
Did he not, he didn't make much money from writing?
Almost nothing as a writer. He got paid £200 for Gulliver's Travels. It's the only thing he asked money for. The rest was done for the politics of it, or was done because he just wanted to do it. He was very good on hoaxes and parodies and so on. So his work in Britain, for example, he effectively was the spin doctor for the Tory government between 1710 and 1714. And his objective was to end the War of Spanish Succession. And to do that, he had to write pamphlets to persuade the Parliament to sign the treaty. And he did that very, very successfully, unpaid. Cathy made the point, or somebody made the point, that the day job was a Church of Ireland clergyman, but he actually spent 4 years in London acting as the Alistair Campbell of the British government. And not paid a penny.
And also anonymous, insofar as his name wasn't attached to it.
But everybody knew.
But then, tell us, how come he didn't make any money out of Gulliver's Travels?
Well, that's the only one he made money out of. He got £200 for Gulliver's Travels.
Right, but nothing compared. I mean, it was a bestseller on its day, right?
Yeah. Oh, in those days, when you gave a book, you gave it to the printer. The copyright was gone, and the printer would have made all the money thereafter. Fortune. His publisher in Dublin, Faulkner, got 50 years out of Swift in publishing his works.
And his name wasn't on Gulliver's Travels. So this is getting back to the secrecy that Cathy mentioned earlier on. You know, he's writing to two ladies in his life, and the names that he gave them were not their actual names. He didn't put his name on Gulliver's Travels.
No, it's just Moria. It's written by Lemuel Gulliver. But that's not unusual for Swift. He puts his name to only 2 items, and I've even forgotten what one of them is, but one you'll be slightly shocked at. It was a proposal for badging beggars, to say a beggar would be given a badge. You can only beg in your own parish. You can't beg anywhere else. Now, this is not an unusual thing in 18th century world, but it's interesting that it's the only thing he put his name to. Everything else was anonymous. But of course, everybody knew who it was. I mean, we're celebrating now the Drapier's letters from 1724. As soon as one of those letters came out, the printer is arrested. Because the letter's anonymous, so the government go after the printer.
Sorry, what were the Drapier's letters about?
Now, well, that was another one. In the mid-1720s, Ireland, shall we say, needed coinage. And the British government decided, do you know what, we'll issue copper farthings and halfpence into Ireland. The Wood Halfpence affair, it's known as. And so they did that, and they gave a patent. These are the way things were done then. They gave a patent to this chap called Wood, an ironmonger from Wolverhampton. Now, gave a patent is slightly euphemistic. He bribed people to get the patent. But they never asked anybody here. And the political class here said, no. We run the show here, not you guys. We're not going to accept this money. So they organised a campaign against it. And it was going reasonably well. But in 1724, they said to Swift, give us a dig out here. So Swift wrote 4 letters, and you should see them. They are the flimsiest little pieces of toilet paper almost. That's how bad the quality of the paper is. And yet, they broke the British government. They couldn't enforce the halfpence. A fantastic victory. But they're satiric. They are making a joke out of all of it. One of them says, for example, well, if William Connolly, you know William Connolly, the builder of Castletown House, biggest house in 18th century Ireland, if he was to collect all his rent in these copper coins, he'd need to have a train of carriages, of 240 carriages, to carry them all the way to the bank. You know, it's just an absurd notion. But they succeeded. They made it unenforceable.
What were his other famous works?
Well, Gulliver is the one that everybody... And by the way, everybody should read Gulliver, not the children's version. Please, please do not read the children's version. It is so sanitized. I mean, Gulliver is just amazing. In Volume 1, and I know we're in a sacred space, but we can go down a few little roads here. In Volume 1, he's very big, right? Just put your thinking cap on. How about the toilet issue if you're huge and everybody else is small, right? And he doesn't spare you the details of how this has to be managed, right? In Volume 2, he's tiny. And again, I'll say, let's put it this way, the ladies take him into their bedroom, and I'll leave the rest to your own imagination, right? He leaves it to your imagination as well, but he gives you plenty of hints. In Volume 3, he's poking fun at human pride, and he's talking about experiments, one of which is to turn excrement back into the food from which the excrement came. And in Volume 4, we have the rational horses, who have yahoos. This is where the word yahoo comes from. A human-like creature that infests the place. And he doesn't use the word final solution, but he effectively is, you know, he could have written one of the Nazi propagandas from the 1930s. Now, I'm not saying he was advocating it. It was the rational horses that were advocating it. So it's a stunning book, absolutely stunning. It's not that long. The language is not obscure. And okay, if you don't get all the references, nerds like me get all the references. You don't have to get all the references. It's like The Simpsons. Pardon? It's like The Simpsons. There's a joke in every paragraph. Literally, there is a wisecrack in every single paragraph. So that's his most famous. I mentioned the Drapier's Letters. The other one for which he's famous for two other works. One is A Tale of a Tub from 1704, which is what made his name. Again, anonymous, but everybody knew he'd written it. And that's the reason why he got the job here, because he wanted a job as a bishop in England. But Queen Anne, shall we say, she was a bit devout. And The Tale of a Tub, I won't go into the details, we'll be here all night.
Well, give us the basic premise.
The basic premise is he says, it's a parody of three brothers, Martin, Peter, and John, as in Anglicanism, Roman Catholicism, and Presbyterianism. And all three come in for a good lashing in terms of how they reform themselves and not reform themselves. Basically, it's a slightly sectarian tract in the sense that Catholics are superstitious, Presbyterians are just mad, but we Anglicans we have the via media, we are the right, have the right way. Queen Anne just said it's taking too much fun out of religion. So when they needed to reward Swift for helping to end the war, Lord Peterborough wrote a wonderful letter to the Prime Minister. He's saying, we need to find a lean bishopric or a fat deanery for Dr. Swift. So they found the fat deanery in Ireland. Push him over there, get him out of our hair. So he comes here in 1714 after Queen Anne dies.
Was he happy to come here?
No. He knew it was the best he could get. So he knuckled down when he came here. And it's here he made his money, going right back to where we started. Again, in those days, clergy do not have a salary. They have rights for land or for tithes for the time being while they're in the job. That's why nobody retires. They all die with their boots on, right? But the income for St. Patrick's Cathedral was £700 a year. You can live on 30. On 100, you're moderately well off. On 300, you're minor gentry. He's in the top 2% on £700 a year.
So it wasn't a bad consolation prize.
Wasn't a bad consolation prize. And he was a conscientious dean. He was a very good dean. You talked about music earlier on. He hadn't a note in his head. So he would get good advisors to tell him, is this music any good? And they'd say, yes, it's very good, it's very good. But he did object, as it was said earlier.
So he's often cited as being a great Irish patriot, or the first Irish patriot. But nothing you've said so far would point us in that direction.
Well, I think two things. One is the Drapier's letters, which I mentioned. But the Drapier's letters were round two in his Irish patriotism. Round one was in 1720 with basically a Buy Irish pamphlet. It was, the proposal for the universal use of Irish manufactures, which has the wonderful sentence that we probably have all heard once in the past, that we should burn everything that comes from England except their people and their coals. Get the joke? What do you do with coal? Right? You should always read the next sentence in Swift. I can't remember it exactly, to paraphrase it, and I might reduce that list by one. No wonder the printer got in trouble. And it was very funny. The judge tried to fix the case, and 9 times he sent the jury out to convict. And 9 times they came back and said, no, we're not going to convict. So that made him a hero. And that's why they called him in 4 years later on the Drapier's letters. He had form in this space. And then his third great contribution to Irish politics is the Modest Proposal from 1729. Again, I don't know if all of you are familiar with the Modest Proposal. It's again anonymous. And he purports to be kind of a country gentleman who says, look at the terrible poverty in Ireland, where you've got these poor people with 5 and 6 children. They have no money, they have no cattle, they have no nothing. The only thing they have of value is their children. And he says, a knowing American friend of mine tells me that an 18-month-old child would make a very fine table for 4 adults, whether it is boiled, roasted, and he says, and I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't go too well in a ragout or a fricassee. So, and then he goes on and on and on, explaining how this would work, and then he finishes in a typical Swiftian line. He says, and by the way, I have nothing to gain from this myself, because all my children are far too old and my wife is past childbearing.
So just to be clear, he's advocating that the Irish give up their babies for food. For other humans.
For the rich.
Was that a serious proposal, or?
Well, of course not. But he has a couple of cracks in the middle of it. He says, now there are alternatives to that, like buying Irish, not sending all the money out to England, not employing Englishmen to do all the jobs around here, not. He's about 10 items in the list, which were also in the Irish manufactures in 1720. So for 10 years, he was banging this drum about how Ireland could be a better place economically. He was getting nowhere, and so he then kind of lost it with the Modest Proposal, because it is savage, and you call the show Savage Indignation, and that's the most savage piece. It is, at one level, a horrible read, and at another level, a tremendous read.
Very good. Tell us, we'll finish up shortly, how did it all work out for him? How long did he live, and where did he die, and all that sort of stuff?
Well, he was here for 30 years. He came here, he was made dean in 1713, went back to England, came back here in August 1714, and basically he only went to England twice after that for a few months each time. He was declared of unsound mind by a tribunal in August 1742. Not mad, he had a stroke. And his financial managers managed his affairs thereafter. And again, it's because of that, those papers went to the hospital. That's where I can find out where his money came from. Now, when he left £15,000 I can finish maybe on this point. It is not in coins. It is not in bank accounts. It is not in shares. It is in secured, this is getting a bit technical but worth doing, secured person-to-person mortgages. So you become your own banker. You lend money to somebody and you get a mortgage on their property. Most of the money was in 3 very large loans. And if I was to put my bank manager's hat on, I would fire him. Because all 3, euphemistically, were experiencing credit quality problems, shall we say. In other words, the interest was not being paid. The interest was the standard legal interest, so there's no issue there. The governors of the hospital got the last of the money back in 1810. He died in 1745. So it took a while, shall we say. Now, to be fair to them, they were managing it all the time as best they could in the meanwhile.
He died here in the deanery?
He died in the deanery 3 years approximately after he was declared of unsound mind. Looked after, actually one point I would like to make is his friends were exceedingly loyal to him. So the governors he had put down in his will for the hospital, the people who were put in charge of his finances, his housekeeper, Mrs. Brent, they all looked after him with great devotion over those 3 years until he died.
Very good, very good. Brendan, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that roundup of Swift's life.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your help. So, Brendan Twomey, Dr. Brendan Twomey.